smart design and then jump into the topic and hand it over to Jasper. So first of all, smart design, if you're familiar or not, we are a strategic design company. We're more than 40 years old, and we are 75 people, all based here in Brooklyn. And so much of what we do at smart design is thinking about complex systems. So the different emerging trends and technologies and policies and culture, and how users' needs and feasibilities and technology combine. And we help our clients innovate and design in these complex systems. So when thinking about complexity, EV is something that completely fits that bill. And we're excited here to talk to you about the world of electric vehicles. I think what makes EV particularly exciting right now, for me, is looking at the effect of policy on EVs. Last year, the Inflation Reduction Act has allocated $370 billion to moving toward cleaner energy in the US. So on one end, it's the incentives and the tax credits for buying electric vehicles, both from the consumer and the business side. And there are all of the incentives for making the supply chain domestic, as well as building out the infrastructure. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Jasper, who is an Associate Design Director here at Smart.
Thanks, Cameron. So hi, everyone. I'm Jasper Dekker. And yeah, like hearing all that, I think really our big question here is like, why isn't every car on our road an EV yet? When we in projects or outside of projects talk to people about their electric vehicles, like they love their electric vehicle. Most, if not all, owners are really an advocate. And besides that, as we all know, we clearly need to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels, and that's a great way to do it. These are just a few reasons, but to answer that question, we have our wonderful panel here. We'll hear all about it, and from them in a minute, we will be covering like who is involved in getting that adoption rate up and getting that transition to really complete. We will learn about what all the hurdles are, what's holding them back. Also hear about exciting new technology and much more. So I would like to ask the panel to introduce themselves and talk about a project that they are currently working on. And Vartan, I want to start with you.
Great. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Can you all hear me? Great. I'll speak up. Is the microphone working or is my voice just low? Great. Okay. I will try to speak up as well. My name is Vartan. I'm the transportation analyst and GreenBiz transport network lead at GreenBiz. As a show of hands, who's heard of GreenBiz group here? Ooh, that's amazing. Oh, great. Basically, the mission of GreenBiz is to empower professional communities to confront the climate crisis. And we do that through various different means, mostly by working with Fortune 100 companies and the like to move them forward in decarbonizing their various forms of operation. We have that from a media and communications arm, and we have that from an events arm, and then we have them from a pure networks arm. I lead everything transport, which is why I'm here speaking on EVs. Also because I love EVs and transportation, so I would always want to be here speaking. Maybe my voice is too loud. In terms of how and why you're seeing the transport network as an image here, and what I actually do mostly on my day-to-day basis, in terms of working with companies, we developed the peer network, which is the transport peer network, to really move companies forward in decarbonizing their fleets from light, medium, and heavy-duty vehicles. For those who don't know, that's like your sedans that sales fleets operate, that's your vans on the medium side, and that's your Class 8 trucks that are moving products across country and around the world. And a lot of these companies that we work with, like your Amazons and your PepsiCos and your Genentechs on the pharmaceutical side, all are trying to electrify their vehicles, but lack a way for them to communicate regularly to understand what's happening in the world. What we do at GreenBiz, and what I mostly do in terms of the peer network side, is create a space for them to come together, facilitating the right people, because our core expertise is to bring the right people together, bring them together to really network and understand how they can, what the cutting edge technology is, what others are doing in the space to decarbonize their fleets, and how they all can collectively move faster together. The idea is that we function around bringing the right people together, because knowledge is best centered when it's shared with others, not kept alone. And in the world of sustainability, a lot of companies we work with understand that while their core business is to innovate in X market, sustainability is not a competitive area for them. They are interested in sharing and educating others in their space, so they all can collectively move faster together. And everyone here, I'm sure, in various different forms, recognizes that in their work stream. So that's my brief intro.
All right. Thank you so much, Vartan. Gonna move on to the next panelist, Keith, on my side.
Okay, my name is Keith Kerman. I'm the Chief Fleet Officer for the City of New York, and I'll follow Vartan's lead. By show of hands, who's heard of the City of New York? We are your municipal government, on behalf of Mayor Eric Adams and our Commissioner Don Pinnock at DCAS. I thank you for having us here. So we're working on a lot of projects on sustainability every single day. We operate the largest municipal fleet in the United States at a little under 30,000 assets. Add in 10,700 school buses, which are actually contracted. And you have a lot of vehicles and an opportunity to really transform on the sustainable side. What's interesting is we are trying to go to an all-electric fleet, and I guess that's my project, for non-emergency light duty and medium by 2035, for heavy duty emergency trucks by 2040. And right now, just for basic facts, we operate 4,100 electric vehicles, with a larger plug-in fleets in the United States, 1,410 electric charging ports, the largest charging network, I believe, single operated charging electric network in the country right now, with a lot more happening. And we're trying to do this in the place you really would go the last, in an emergency services fleet. My biggest three customers, and I bet you've heard of them, the New York City Police Department, the New York City Sanitation Department, and the New York City Fire Department. So we're trying to electrify in a place where reasonably you would say you should go last. We're trying to go first. There are a lot of challenges and difficulties, but the good news is if we can do this, then anyone can do it. If you can electrify a fleet like ours with 190 types of on and off-road vehicles, mostly oriented toward 24-hour emergency service, you can electrify pretty much anything.
All right, fantastic. Last but not least, M.
Thanks, everybody. Can you hear me? I'm Dan Winston. I'm a Vice President of Business Development for Mobility at Inspiration Mobility. A bit about Inspiration, I'll tell you about a project we're doing. Inspiration is an EV solutions company. We finance and manage electric fleets and charging infrastructures for commercial fleets. We're a full service partner on every step of the journey, transforming a fleet from a bunch of, Buicks into a set of electric vehicles that make sense for a particular use case. What does that mean? We start with the question of what should go electric when, based on range, routing, based on the use case. There are these larger trucks, delivery vans, or small, taxi cabs, all the way through the financing of the assets. We own vehicles for our customers and lease them to them. And then onto the operations of it. We provide fleet management services that some of you may be familiar with, things like titling and registration. Still need to do that for an EV. Things like maintenance networks, providing our customers with access to maintenance services for their fleets, because they don't want to worry about that. But also crucially, we are a developer of charging infrastructure, because when you're a company trying to go electric, first question is, well, wait, where are we going to charge? And it's this new question that fleet managers have to ask themselves. So let me talk about a project. We're excited. We're in a pilot program with a company you might have heard of called Shell. Shell is the large gas station company. They have a business called Shell Fleet Solutions, where they're providing fleet management services for commercial fleets. These include fuel cards, gas cards, to help businesses pay for their fuel, maintenance services, telematics, and other things. Shell's made a major investment in charging infrastructure. Shell Recharge, leveraging, I think they have more than 5,000 charging stations, or more than service stations all over the country. We are in a pilot program with them where we are a leasing provider, so that their team can go and say, look, we have access to charging infrastructure. We've made this large investment. Here's a company that can help you get access to electric vehicle leases for your fleet. And so I tell the story because I think it's a great example of how the EV evolution is making for, I think you might say, some strange bedfellows, where people, sustainability leaders are companies that have been traditional leaders in, gas and petroleum, things like that. So that's an interesting project we're working on. I'm excited to talk more about things that we do, and also just more broadly, this exciting EV transition that we're all part of.
Great. All right, we're going to jump into the questions, a bit of housekeeping. We will do audience Q&A at the end, so if you can keep them in your head, and Jasper will walk around afterward. We are recording this session. It's a live stream, and we will also have a recording and an article that goes with this, probably in a week. So I'm going to start with my first question here. At Smart Design, whenever we start a design project, it's always rooted in research and customer understanding. Who are the players? Who are the people that are going to buy in or use this service? So I'm going to start with the basics here. We have experts and novices in the crowd. Who are the actors and the players in the world of EV, and who wants to get an electric vehicle and why? And we do have a somewhat designated order here, so I'm going to start with Vartan.
I want an EV. I live in New York though, so there's no point. But I'm going to represent the consumer voice, even though GreenBiz's audience and the people we work with are mostly fleets. Dan will be touching on the consumer from the fleet perspective, but interesting facts, right? So just a few days ago, I read that officially the United States has passed 7% of all new vehicle sales being electric in some form. Over the summer of last year, it was at 5%, which Bloomberg identifies globally as being a pivotal threshold when once a country passes 5% adoption of anything in terms of technology, the S curve picks up and it becomes a massive adoption wave over the next few years and beyond. And when I officially, I hadn't mentioned when I graduated law school back in 2018, when I entered the field of EVs and transport in 2018, 2019, the US was at 1% EV adoption for new vehicle sales. So we're in a moment where we're seeing massive incline in consumer adoption. And why is that actually happening? There are a few reasons, right? I mean, I can't touch on all of them, but we are officially seeing a lot of EV options existing for people to actually pick from. Historically, it was just Tesla. Tesla is still a huge portion of the EV market in the United States and around the world. But we have over 40 models to pick from almost right now, and hundreds more coming by 2024 through commitments of GM, Ford, Audi, BMW, and others. So the range of vehicles is expanding, the technology in these vehicles is expanding, the right range actually for the vehicles to drive a distance is becoming better. 300 plus miles is the actual average. So when you put these technology from a vehicle perspective into a bundle, you can understand why people are now saying, oh, well, high gas prices, electric vehicle option exists, I should purchase it. But then the question comes, well, where am I going to charge? And we'll talk about some of the hurdles that exist with charging infrastructure that have held back people from adopting an EV, but that's also being addressed in some portion right now. The IRA that passed last year is investing significant amounts of money, billions of dollars to build out 500,000 chargers by 2030 that going to be built upon what already exists from Tesla superchargers and just the overall open network that exists like Electrify America, EVgo, ChargePoint. So charging stations are also being built out. So then you understand what else is pushing the market for consumer adoption. And the crux of it comes down to consumer education. If you have all these factors in play, the right vehicles exist, charging infrastructure exists, none of it matters until consumers are educated about what options actually exist in front of them and fighting misinformation and all that. And that's also where GreenBiz kind of comes in, but not just us, anyone educating people about electrification and transportation is doing a good service to the industry, because once a person, and this will be the key point of my entire conversation today, once a person experiences an EV and sees it for themselves, whether they're riding in the passenger seat or driving it, they really can't go back to a gas car. Going back to a gas car will feel like you're going onto a horse to go from New York to California. It'll be horrible. But all these other factors need to line up, and then you need to be educated. And then it'll take time. And we are in that moment right now where the transition is actually happening.
Keith, do you want to describe some of the city players?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of players in a change like this, right? Trying to undo the combustion engine, which created the modern world that we are all inhabiting and hopefully enjoying, is a major thing to do. You have, of course, policy players. In our world, a lot of what we're doing is driven by climate policy. We have an executive order that governs our transition to an all-electric fleet, but there is a local law introduction, and I have no doubt very soon we'll probably see local law legislation to match that mayoral executive order. Clearly on the industry side, we need electric vehicles to buy, right? So if there are no supply of these vehicles or no viable supply, you can have all your ambition and policy you want. If you have nothing to invest that's within a cost range that's reasonable, that has functionality, that's an issue. One of the things we spend a lot of time on is developing the marketplace, talking to manufacturers, pushing other fleets to talk to manufacturers. I invite all of you to come on May 11th to our annual fleet show at Flushing Meadow Park. A lot of fun, 9 to 2. We'll have announcements and food and lots of alternative fuel.
It is fun.
It is, see, there we go, a testimony. But then I'll say the one other group that I think you really, in my world, we have to stay always focused on, for me to be in my job, is the actual users of these vehicles. And so, the good news on electric vehicles is that in the last 15 years, really 10 years, remember Who Killed the Electric Car is only 15-year-old documentary, right? This industry is really very new. The core vehicle for most of what goes on out there, sedans, SUVs, pickups that aren't being operated too complexly, vans for standard delivery, it all exists now, right? In my world, we actually deal with a lot of complexity and a lot of nuances on vehicles. So I cannot put out electric vehicles just to put out electric vehicles. I have to put out vehicles that can perform completely the public missions that you all depend on as residents. And so you get into some interesting challenges on when we deal with customers. Can these vehicles plow? Can they do 2 to 3 shifts? What happens if you're in an emergency? What happens if you operate the beaches? Can you throw an electric vehicle out and maintain your beaches? Beaches are maintained by equipment operations, off-road operations, emergency, fire trucks, ambulances, fire ladders, right? So, in our world, we test the limits of what an electric vehicle is and what it can do. So we're often pushing the marketplace in places that maybe the average consumer doesn't have to worry about, plowing an emergency response, or what if I'm using it 24 hours a day during a hurricane? Those are the questions that we push on. So I would say the most important of all our clients and interested parties are the operators themselves.
Dan,
Yeah.
want to round us out?
Yeah, and I just would pick up right on that. There are an incredible number of actors, as we would say, stakeholders in this transition from a kind of commercial fleet perspective. But we always start with our customer, our end user, the driver of a company vehicle. Maybe they're a salesperson. And that person is, on the one hand, anticipating this change in a very exciting way. As Vartan was saying, the experience of driving an EV is really wonderful. On the other hand, it's kind of scary, because where are you going to charge? How's it going to work? You can't just go to the same service station you've been going to for so many years. And so we try to think about how do we smooth the path for that person who's the kind of end user, the fleet driver, for our clients, by providing kind of a comprehensive set of services. And it is exciting. It's really fun to drive an EV in a way that maybe it's not always so fun to drive a traditional gas vehicle, but there are lots of questions, particularly around the edge cases. What happens if I break down because I run out of a battery, or if my tire pops? The tire's a little bit different maybe than it was a tire on a regular car. These are all questions people have. We have to answer to them. But then there are other actors. We think about the decision makers in companies, the fleet manager, the person who's been thinking maybe in a similar way about their fleet for 30 or 40 years, and suddenly they are faced with an amazing set of new questions that they have to answer. The analogy I often draw is what if you said to a fleet manager, someone who'd been managing, let's say, 200 vehicles for a sales team, hey, you've got to build a gas station at your garage now, or you've got to put little gas stations at all your employees' houses. This is actually in effect what's being, the questions being asked when you think about transitioning to a world where you have to be responsible for charging, because it's not always clear that charging the public network is going to be available, particularly based on your geography, if there's not so many chargers around, or if it's going to be the most economical solution for a company. So a fleet manager has a whole host of economic considerations, ranging from charging, when, how, where. Do we invest in our own charging infrastructure, all the way to tax credits? All these regulations are really, really important. But how exactly, as a fleet manager, do you take advantage of it? I'll just highlight a couple of other actors that it's kind of amazing to think about. There's like a bewildering array of
Mhm.
people involved in this transition. You know, we talk about charging infrastructure. How do you manage a bunch of chargers? Like, what's the software package that manages and interfaces with the utility, ensures that cars are charging at the time when the energy is cheapest, or maybe, you know, affecting a vehicle to grid transmission of power. There are at our clients really important decision makers who are entering into the conversation maybe newly, which is sustainability managers or a chief sustainability officer who's saying, we have a company very important objective of reducing our carbon emissions. How are we going to do it? You know, and often a very, very important way of doing that is addressing the emissions coming from the fleet. But maybe also it's addressing the emissions coming from the commuters, the people who are driving to the offices. What if they were in EVs and not in gas cars? So there's so many different stakeholders involved in this transition, and it's kind of amazing just to think like how much this really ripple effects that this has through the kind of the economy. I think is the only way to describe it. But those are some of those four, I guess, of the big ones that we think about.
Great. Thank you all so much. Yeah, kind of building on what Cameron already said, like we always start with the players, the actors, like who is involved, who are the humans involved. And I want to dig a little bit deeper on some of the difficulties that we've been hearing, like from all of you three. What are really the biggest hurdles for all of these players involved, not just the end user and their anxieties, but also like maintenance personnel or emergency personnel, training, you know, supply chain. We've talked before about all these things. And Keith, I want to start with you. What's really getting in the way of making this big transition? What are the biggest challenges right now that people have?
Well, there are lots of issues that come into play. One is definitely the availability of models that can perform the missions we need them to perform. So just 3 years ago, I would have told you there was not a viable electric cargo van or pickup within a price range worth talking about that was electric in the marketplace. In January, we announced the first major order with Mayor Adams of 500 electric cargo vans and pickup trucks. Only 2 weeks later, of course, to read in the New York Times that the plant of the pickup truck supplier would be shut down for an undetermined amount of time. But our orders are still there and we'll get them maybe later in the year, but we'll get them. So, but developing the models and expanding that is big for us. And again, you know, I'm in a municipal work environment, literally with 190 different types of vehicles. We operate everything from puppet mobiles to tanks. So we have a lot that we're at: construction industry, garbage industry, policing industry, fire industry. So, you know, we're pushing. So that's a big issue. We've seen enormous progress, certainly on light duty, now on medium duty, and we got 25% of the city fleet is pickups and vans. And, you know, pickups and vans are a big part of what's out there now in the broader, you know, transport industry. We still need to see a lot of development on trucking and specialized equipment, right? There are some models out there. There are some expensive models out there, but, you know, the ROI on medium duty to light duty, you can kind of make that case right now. Heavy duty still needs a lot of development on range or capacity, on models, on market. So that's one big challenge. Certainly in the short term, you know, we've had supply chain challenges, right? So COVID has, you know, created all kinds of issues in the automotive supply chain. So while, you know, you led with the question, why isn't everybody in an electric car? Well, a more practical question at the moment is, can you even get an electric car? Right? I mean, go try and find an electric car, and they're most likely going to tell you, you know, for a new electric car, 6 to 8 months, you know, waiting period right now. So you do have these supply chain issues. A reminder that, you know, we don't live in a vacuum, right? If we want to transform these industries, we need to make sure these are healthy industries and they can, you know, we have electric issues on, you know, supply of lithium, on cobalt. Do y'all know who the two biggest suppliers in the world of those two critical ingredients to electric cars are? Give you a hint, they might not be most inclined countries toward us. So, you know, you have to look at that whole supply chain issue. And as we grow it, you know, making sure that we can viably scale electric vehicles with what is required to produce them. And are we, as in a country, are we developing those raw materials? Are we going to have our own internal ability to supply all the ingredients to build these cars? And then the third thing, of course, is charging. can't talk about electric cars without charging infrastructure. We're working hard to grow the charging network for the city. But you know, in a place like New York, we're space challenged and everything, right? We battle, person to person for every parking space every day. So where's all that charging going to go? And it's a challenge for all of us, obviously in the city side, but in the private side as well. So charging and building that out is obviously a huge necessity if we're going to have an electrified fleet.
All right, thank you so much. Dan, kind of over to you. What big hurdles do you see for all of the actors that you mentioned? Because you listed out quite a few.
Yeah. I think everyone's got their own challenges they're confronting. Let me think about a couple that I hear about, and I think maybe I can say are somewhat easily remedied. But the first one really is exactly your point, Keith. Thinking about range anxiety. This is a classic. People are like, wait a minute, the range simply is not long enough on these electric vehicles. We're concerned we're going to get left out. We can't charge them. We really need a longer range vehicle. And we are often able to solve this with data because it's well, look, the most EVs have, upwards of 200 miles of range in a single charge, and you can do the math. Your vehicles are going 100 miles a day. People still are concerned because it's easy to imagine these long tail scenarios where you just need, for some reason, need to go very long, or a driver needs to go really long route, and people just aren't comfortable. There's a change, and it's something that they've been used to for so long. Other challenges are things that you wouldn't expect, that you were kind of learning about, thinking about, for example, the maintenance garages that can serve EVs. It's not simply a matter of whether they have, I don't know, backup batteries, the ability to engineer, to work with electric vehicle infrastructure, but they have the lifts that are required to lift up an EV, whose undercarriage may be different than a regular ICE vehicle. So there's a lot of, like, I don't want to call them little because they're very significant, they're very important, but there's downstream kind of operational impacts and challenges that, in sum, I think just make kind of a cluster of challenges. The list of questions can be hundreds long. And I think I can say that's why, it's sort of where we come in. We try to say, we're going to simplify this list of questions for you. There's a couple for customer to answer, but then there's a whole bunch that we can answer. We'll come to you with that. So I think in addition to individual, sort of individual challenges, it's just all these new considerations that, because they're new, represent a huge challenge. You didn't have to think about gassing up your car, gassing up your fleet's cars, or getting the cars repaired for decades, literally. And now all of a sudden, all these things are, in some sense, going to shift in the future.
Use a flatbed tow truck if you need to tow your electric vehicle.
Why is that?
Because you do not want to put a electric vehicle on a wrecker. It is not a great way to transport an electric vehicle mechanically. So you generally want to flatbed electric vehicles when you tow them, so that you're not damaging the components.
Exactly. So I guess you learned the hard way, or
We've learned many things the hard way, not that. Many other things we've learned the hard way.
right. All right, Vartan, over to you. What big hurdles do you see in the players that you represent?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the hurdles mentioned already are across the consumer side as well. But I've become very prominently known among my friends, colleagues, to be lately discussing one major hurdle that just beats all hurdles. I love that prize. And it's reliability and uptime of charging infrastructure. And what I mean by that is you have a station installed in the ground, but who cares if it's installed if it's not working? And who cares if it's installed if you're on a road trip and you get there and it's not working and you're stuck? Then your EV kind of sucks. And if I'm an enthusiast of EVs and I love EVs, I couldn't even back that one up to say, no, you should still love EVs. So yeah, imagine your grandmother or your parents bought their first EV, you convince them, and then they can't charge it because they're at a public infrastructure location, like Electrify America, for example, or ChargePoint, and it just doesn't work. And there's 4 stations. You unplug, you go to the next one, that one doesn't work either. You unplug, go to the next one, that doesn't work either. And then you unplug for the final one, and it's supposed to charge at 150 kilowatts, which is pretty fast for fast charging. And it only does like 60 kilowatts. So you're stuck there for, instead of like 30 minutes, 20 minutes, you're stuck there for an hour plus after having experienced that stressful situation. Or none of them work and you're just stuck there and you have to call someone to tow you to the next station. So that is the prominent issue. I think we've had range anxiety before in the early days of the EV industry. I think with 300 plus mile vehicles, that's no longer becoming that much of an issue from a consumer perspective. And I think the biggest issue now is, will the station work? There's solutions coming, right? I mean, we can look at it from a technical perspective and then what like policy is doing. Technically speaking, not to keep mentioning that, but Tesla has one of the most reliable station networks that exist. They historically are above like 98% uptime for their stations. And they are one of the reasons why their vehicles sell till this day is because their supercharger network is so reliable. People want that added convenience of being not to think and just charge while driving. Everyone else has to rely on the public network of stations, which have historically been less reliable. And policy now is being used to move them to a more reliable future. So the ERA, which is giving billions of dollars to these companies and to states and cities to deploy infrastructure, as for the first time in history, the federal government has passed uptime and reliability standards, requiring that any company that deploys with federal funding will have to meet 97% uptime or greater. Now, how the federal government and state actually take that data from companies and leverage it to ensure that these companies actually are operating above that number is yet to be seen, because no stations have been deployed with that funding yet. So we should see that coming this summer. We should start seeing it this summer into the fall, seeing the first stations deployed with federal funding, I would imagine. And we'll see how the station networks improve over time. But that is definitely going to be, I think I've coined the phrase that is not the actual phrase, but I think it is the Achilles heel of the EV industry. And we have to make sure that we don't actually end up like Achilles himself with the EV industry overall.
Great. So you've outlined some of the hurdles. Now I'm going to look on the other side of the coin. What is exciting you? What is the emerging technology or the trends or the human behavior that is giving you data insight or hopeful insight into how these challenges will be surmounted? I'm going to start with you, Dan.
Well, the first thing, I'm going to go back to the stakeholders, the actors, is just the number of people who are involved here and the broad alignment. I think we're all seeing, even among companies or people, where it may be unexpected, that this is a transition that just has to happen, that makes sense. There are hurdles that often take some time, but people understand this is a good business decision. Everything's aligned and makes this a really good choice for my company if there's enough support, and if I, as a fleet manager, let's say, are farsighted enough. And there are so many people that are now in the room, the sustainability person, who is a real mandate to I'll be told to speak up. Okay, a real mandate to decarbonize the whole company. And so there's just momentum in a really, really exciting way. But there are things that are more specific. One is data. Just EVs are computers. They are really connected, and the ability to optimize the system. Once you go electric, you can then optimize everything from when your home charger is charging, again based on when power is expensive, or using your car to help recharge the grid. These are things that just simply aren't possible. You can't imagine in an ICE context. And the other thing I just would say is the sort of downstream customer-facing operational impacts. We have a partner, UFO Drive, that enables curbside rentals. These are just things that weren't possible with ICE vehicles, but because you can charge anywhere, you can use your phone, you can unlock it. The EV is a computer. There's a great experience, and it's transforming just an industry you wouldn't necessarily think of. When things go electric, everything changes. And so I think that's just really exciting opportunity for so many people.
Okay, all right. There are a lot of exciting things about electric vehicles. First and foremost, they do not emit noxious fumes, right? And that is actually the key here. But that's really great. On the few cold days that we had this year, when you have to warm up your car, if it's iced over, you're spewing and idling. Electric car isn't doing that. And so you're having a cleaner air, you're a cleaner driving experience. I mean, first and foremost, we shouldn't forget that. Now, there are lots of problems with charging and challenges with charging, but it still beats the gas station experience, right? Going to a gas station is not, something we all love, right? There's lots of nostalgia in the United States and a very strong, affection for the driving experience. That's not true of the gas station experience. And by the way, we are all charging already. Every person in this room, I guarantee you, has an iPhone, and you've already figured out without a government program how to get it charged all day long, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. So we are going to solve charging for vehicles because we already have all trained ourselves on charging. We now just have to work with a different plug. A third thing I will tell you, which you may not be aware of, New York City is unusual in many respects. In one side of the fleet, we've already operated about 400 electric vehicles through their entire lives. We have about 200 GM Bolts and 200 Leafs that are already 12 or 13 years old. We've already gone through an entire useful life. And so on some of the things that are asserted about electric vehicles, like maintenance, I can tell you for real, they are tremendous on maintenance, as they should be. We got about 70% less maintenance costs over the life of these vehicles compared to actually pretty efficient Priuses, because most of the vehicles that we were replacing were actually hybrids, which are pretty awesome in themselves. So the maintenance side is tremendous. You don't have the motor to break down. You don't have the fuel lines. You don't have, if you know cars, the catalytic converter to be stolen. And I will tell you that is one thing on the Prius, which has been a tremendous car, but those catalytic converters are flying left and right because they are very attractive to many people. And so the maintenance benefits, the fuel benefits, of course, fuel, incredibly expensive in the last year. That is all there. There's a real ROI on these vehicles, which is very exciting. And then the fourth thing I'll just say is, and why I do think the electric vehicle will ultimately succeed. It's been stated, it's a lot of fun car to drive. Most people who say they can't stand electric cars, I then ask, have you ever driven an electric car? And they say, oh, no, I haven't. All right, so go drive one. We were out in an activation, an emergency activation out in the Bronx a little while ago, and we had to spend the whole day with the police department. I won't bore you on why, but one of the police officers came over to me and said, oh, I got to tell you, you're the electric car guy. We don't, we're not so into these. So I said, well, have you ever driven one? He goes, oh, I don't know. So I asked the Parks Department to go bring over a law enforcement Mach-E, the Mustang. And I said, well, we got nothing else to do. Go take it out. Came back and said, oh, forget everything I said. I'm your poster guy now for this thing. Get me one. Beautiful car, right? So that is something that the electric car is fun to drive. If you get into it, this whole concept of, instant torque, right? The idea of the electric car is somehow not a strong car, where in fact, the electric car will just move you unbelievably quickly. Although we do not encourage that, we want safe driving, but it is a fun product, and so it's not a case where this is like in my life V8 juice and you got to take it because somehow it's healthy for you. Once you get into these, people like them, they'll want to have them, and they'll sell themselves.
Yeah, three things kind of stand out to me for being actually exciting. One was already mentioned in terms of like the battery chemistries for these vehicles, right? So a recent book came out called Cobalt Red, which if you haven't read it, I would highly encourage you reading it. It highlights the issue going on with the mining of materials for lithium batteries, not just electric vehicles, even though that's like the main area people are focusing now because everything's a battery with electric vehicles. Like everything that has a battery in it has been somehow mined with critical minerals in it, like your iPhone or anything else. And it highlights the prominent issue, which is cobalt being the prominent dirty mineral. So one of the exciting things that's happening in the industry is figuring out battery chemistries that remove cobalt entirely within the battery while making a better product is an area that's super exciting. So like lithium phosphate batteries are already being deployed right now, which entirely don't have cobalt in it at all, which is great because it removes the need for mining in Congo, which is extremely bad for multiple different reasons. So that's extremely exciting. And there are other forms of battery chemistries that are coming out, being tested, that will further remove the need for critical minerals like that. And then obviously, once you get into the whole industry of mining and raw minerals, the recycling of those minerals also is super exciting because theoretically, all the minerals can be recycled endlessly moving forward. So Redwood Materials is one major company, former executive of Tesla, now made this recycling company. And once that company goes public, this is not any kind of financial investing advice. I would highly encourage you all look into that company if it does, because recycling of raw minerals will be the future of the entire planet, because all those minerals historically right now, they are using iPhone batteries and anything else. Like you can take your iPhone to an Audi dealership and drop it into the Redwood Materials box, and Redwood takes that box of iPhones and they recycle those iPhones to make new batteries that goes into an electric car or anywhere else. And once vehicles off the road go into that entire process, you will have significant more scale of recycling going on. Another area that's super exciting is bidirectional charging. So the idea from a consumer perspective of plugging in your car to your home and providing power to your home when the power goes out is super nice. I think that's really convenient. And then taking it even further out to like a fleet, plugging in 1,000 cars and powering a city potentially when the grid needs energy is super cool. And that's already being tested on small scales. If you've all seen those blue little Teslas driving around here called from Revel, they are currently already testing with Fermata bidirectional charging, and they're giving power back to the utility on a very, very small scale pilot, but that extrapolated out 25, 30 years into the future. You could have everyone's car parked anywhere could be a energy source. And the final thing, which is more questionable if it's actually going to happen in any kind of grand scale, is electrifying roads themselves. So I know it's happening in some parts of Europe, like tests, but having roads be electrified, so when you're driving, your car will naturally just pick up energy from the driving experience from the road. But questions remain about how feasible that actually is. If a snowplow goes through it, what will happen to the road? So some cool things.
Just wanted to jump in. I should say here in New York, Revel is a proud customer of Inspiration. We
Yes.
own their assets and lease to them. We were really glad to make that announcement earlier in our company's life when they launched their fleet here in New York. So it's great.
Right.
Small world.
I know, right? I just gotta say, like, between the previous question about the hurdles and then this question, the energy here between these three people is a lot more. It was really, really nice to see.
We hate hurdles.
We can go on forever, but before we close down and open up the audience for questions, any questions you might have, I kind of want to ask the three panelists here, like, of all the things we talked about, like all the people involved, all the problems, potential problems, like the opportunities that we see, what is the one thing that you want this audience to be, to take away from this event, to walk away and then keep that in their heads? Vartan, kind of want to stay with you.
If you can guess mine, it's going to be go drive an EV. It's going to be, it's a great experience. And you can actually right now go do it, not right now, but upcoming. The New York City Auto Show is coming up next month, and you can actually test drive an EV indoors because there's no emissions. So go test drive.
There you go. Keith, what's yours?
Nothing is inevitable. So just 15 years ago, as I mentioned, the electric car industry was a non-thought. The most exciting thing happening was a documentary trying to figure out who had killed it. Now, electric vehicles, everybody's going to have an electric vehicle in a couple of years. Why isn't everybody in an electric car? Electrification is an achievement. It will be a hard-fought, hard-won achievement. Policy can change anytime. Technology, supply chain, we already saw it change. All kinds of things can play out. Reminder, we're all, there's a European war going on that impacts a lot of things in the transportation and economic aspects of our lives. So I would just remind everybody that if you want this to happen, and I certainly do, and I know everyone here does, that this will be hard fought. You have to push at the policy level. You have to invest. You have to innovate. You have to buy electric cars, and you have to keep the momentum going.
All right, fantastic. Dan, you want to close this up?
Thanks, Ed. So this is an incredibly exciting moment. Electric vehicles are going to transform like the whole economy in some sense, as I've said a couple of times. And I think I would just similarly ask everyone to reflect on, that's a big shift, and we have had other shifts in reimagining. For example, the introduction of gas cars, where we kind of rethought everything. We thought about how cities were built, roads created around this system and this new technology. And I think there's an opportunity as we transition to electric vehicles to learn from what happened last time and think about maybe if there are ways to do things differently, think about why we're making this transformation of our transportation system. It's for us, it's for people. It's not, the technology perhaps isn't just an end to itself. It's about creating a more sustainable world for all of us to live in and enjoy. And I think we can learn from some of the things that happened the last time we transformed our way we get around and do it even better this time.
Wonderful.
All right.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
All right, that concludes the formal panel discussion. We're now going to, round of applause. We have about 10 minutes for open Q&A. So raise your hand if you have a question, and then Jasper is going to come by with a microphone.
Real quick question. So the state of New York collects about $1 billion a year in gas tax, and the municipalities collect another almost 800 million in local sales tax, of which goes to bridges, infrastructure, MTA, and everything else. When do you see there's going to be a mileage or usage tax put on electric vehicles to offset the infrastructure that they're utilizing?
Wonder who will answer that question.
I'm happy to jump in.
Oh,
and
okay.
Someone else can. It's a hot topic. I'm not taking all of it. There are states that are implementing some version of it, and some are toying with the idea. I believe Washington State implemented or was proposing to implement something like that. It got very heated very fast because a small percentage, even though the numbers seem large, and you just say, and they are large. I think there's a question and conversation to be had, largely for all the United States, in terms of how much funds actually will be generated from just taxing all miles. That'll help compensate the charges that are needed to help infrastructure in the future. And I mean, when you bring up an idea of like charging all miles from an EV perspective, the left thinks that it's a conversation of hitting EVs to remove EVs from the conversation entirely, and the right said it's the way for us to actually remove EVs. So it's like become a political game as opposed to an actual like logistical real way of generating funds, I think. Wasn't a great answer because there's no real great solution for it.
Okay, mine's kind of a two-parter, but it has to do with buy-in from companies. Do you see buy-in from fleet managers or more from like the C-suite level, sustainability? I know that there can be like differences there. And then what are the most valuable propositions or selling points that you're seeing that convinces people, okay, this is a good idea? Because not everybody can like get into an EV and test drive it before it's brought into like their fleet.
Yeah, I'll take that. First, I'll say test driving an EV is a very good way to get people on board, even for a fleet manager. First thing I would say is the people who are often excited. It often does start with that senior level person who's thinking in big terms, decarbonizing the company, the supply chain, scope 1 and scope 3 emissions. What are we doing? Where are we buying our power? And as part of a comprehensive decarbonization strategy, taking your fleet from ICE to electric is often a very, very quick win relative to some of the other changes that can be made. That's one. The fleet manager, who then might get an objective kind of passed down kind of electric, pretty quickly, in our experience, realizes, well, wait a minute, there's real savings here. And so to point out some of the value propositions, you were saying it, in addition to no more fuel, you just charge, and that's not great. Maintenance is vastly different. There's enormous savings in maintenance. Basically, just thinking about glass and tires. You don't have to deal with oil changes, just to name one. These things are like it's not just the direct spend, but it's time off the road. Your sales team's not on the road; they're in the repair shop. When you don't have to deal with that, it's not just become a cost question, but a revenue question. You have more productive time, and so when we have the opportunity to build a data-driven business case along those lines, combining the tax credits which can be monetized, combining the fuel savings, maintenance savings, and overall kind of carbon impact, it's usually pretty clear that it's a good value proposition. I think those are some of the messages that resonate. I would also just say that it varies very much. People are in different places based on, if you're in California, said you got to go electric. Well, okay, that's a very different thing than if you're in a state where maybe it's not talked about. And even if the math is the same, the availability of public charging maybe isn't. So there's just a lot of considerations that make it quite different problem to navigate, depending where you are, who you are.
Knew we had another question here.
So I'm particularly interested in what is right now something of a niche or cottage industry, which is around EV conversions of existing cars, particularly classic and vintage. But do you see in the mix of things, and I applaud the focus on scale, fleet, getting there faster, but there are 18 million people who own a classic or an older car. There's a rapidly growing ecosystem of vendors and suppliers and interest around preserving cars and converting some of them to EVs. Do you guys have any thoughts about where conversion could fit into the mix?
Are you guys converting vehicles?
Yeah, so we are beginning that effort in what we call repowering, but essentially is conversion. We're focusing on trucks. Certainly repower, and we'll see how that goes. We're doing our first few repowers as we speak, and you will see how it works. It is, you have issues. You got to make sure that obviously the battery that you install is safe, that it's operating properly. You would like to repower in partnership with the manufacturer, not in kind of, in a tug of war with them, since obviously you're changing the core vehicle. But trucking, school buses are a really good potential area for repowering, and that some of that be the Logan School Bus Company has already done some of that in the city, and that could be a very viable way as we pursue our 2035 goal to electrify 10,000 plus school buses. I think repowering has an opportunity. So we're looking at it. It's very early, so I don't want to say. We are hopeful that repower can be part of what we're doing. We're launching our early initiatives, but definitely I think in some of like non-emergency trucking, rack trucks and dump trucks that don't get box vans that don't necessarily do huge miles, and in our world are non-emergency. School busing are really interesting places to try repowering.
But related to that, is it the economy of scale because you're at the same vehicle and you can repeat the conversion process that makes it, somewhat attractive?
Yeah, I mean, look, buying a new truck is expensive, right? So if you're going to buy a new $250,000 truck, that's a lot of cost. If you can potentially, and a huge percentage of the maintenance that goes into vehicles, are the engine, transmission, or the fuel line components, right? If you can do $100,000 repower and get 7-8 more years on that, right, with hopefully the fuel and maintenance savings and extend the life of that vehicle, then that can be really interesting, proposition. We don't, I'm very aware of what you're saying on the lighter duty side, the classic car side. In our world, we would not pursue it. In the lighter duty side, we'll just buy a new electric car. It's really in the trucking that we are hopeful, and we've started that process. And, hopefully 9 months from a year from now, I'll have some more specifics to say about how that's going.
All right, we have time for 2 more questions, and I saw some hands go up here. All right.
I'm amongst one of the 55% or so of New Yorkers who don't own a car. And meanwhile, at least anecdotally, I'm hearing that Gen Z are getting driver's licenses at lower rates than ever before. A lot of this conversation has been around personal vehicle ownership. I want to hear a little bit more about public transit and alternatives to personal vehicle ownership.
I'm wearing my bicycle socks. I love public transit.
Well, I mean, I am a subway user and a biker, and so support public transport. Obviously, public transport is hugely important to our environmental goals. And so, I'm not the person they put out to talk about public transport publicly, but obviously it's a huge important part of what we're doing. Let me say this about public transport as it relates to fleet and electrification, right? As people hopefully start to lower their amount of personal vehicle ownership, personal vehicle is ownership is pretty inefficient, right? Most of our vehicles just sit and take up space and don't actually move. One of the things that we've seen is the concept of fleet is starting to take up a percentage of personal vehicle ownership. Instead of owning a vehicle, you go to ride share companies or you go to other types of fleet opportunities. And, the reality is to some extent, fleet is also becoming an alternative on public transportation. Some of that maybe not what we would ideally want to happen. So one thing that I will say about where fleets can come in, public and private fleets, is fleet is a place you could really electrify quickly, right? Fleets are organized by fleet managers and companies, have common directions, common ROIs they're pursuing, are able to put in infrastructure often. So one of the things that we're trying to push is, to the extent that the concept of fleets starts to become more important in the world of just people getting around day to day on their own, and more important as part of the public transportation system, it's a great place to do electrification, to do zero emissions, frankly, also to do safety and vision zero and safe strategies. So, we're trying to push the fleet industry, public and private, to be, on the forefront of adopting all these kind of improvements.
And then I'm just going to say, I think it's a great question. And, one of the reasons, just speaking personally, that I met Inspiration, I'm a city dweller. I have one hybrid car. It's about 10 years old, 12 years old now. But we know that, personal mobility is shifting, but commercial fleets, things like taxi cabs or service vehicles, occupy a sort of specific niche. They kind of have a sort of use case that is particular to vehicles in many cases. And so it makes sense to have those be electric. If they've got to be vehicles, let's have them be these clean, sustainable vehicles. And then one other thing I would say is we're increasingly talking to a lot of companies that are doing shuttles, these large buses that are, for employees. And that makes it a ton of sense to go electric for some of the reasons that we're saying, because it's large cap cost, enormous maintenance cost. And so fleets are doing the calculations, they're running the analyses in a way that consumers really aren't, constantly looking at where they can find savings. And so we see them moving faster there, particularly for these larger assets.
Yeah, exactly what they've mentioned. Clearly we all love public transit, so thank you for that question, if we're all answering it. There's a lot happening from the consumer perspective that I think is super exciting for everyone to kind of if you haven't already, to be aware of. I mean, high-speed rail, which is notorious for being in Europe, and everyone thinks, oh, it's amazing in Europe, is actually coming to the United States. This is the first time we can actually say it's happening. It's happening on the West Coast. Lucky them. But LA to Las Vegas is already building construction right now. It started when they got the final approval to have high-speed rail line going from LA to Vegas. Also, the notorious LA to San Francisco high-speed rail is being finally, hopefully, fingers crossed, will start being built. But that's also going to come to the East Coast as well. So that's one way of traveling around. Then I'm sure everyone here knows of micromobility in any scale. Scooters, bikes, city bike, and Lyft is very well known here, and that is a great way of moving around. That idea of that's becoming more electrified is a great way, right? We're seeing that happen. And then the city announcing that all Lyft and Uber rides themselves will be electrified by 2030, I believe it is. This is another huge step in the right direction, saying if you don't own a car, you have micromobility, you have transit, which everyone hates on the New York City subway, but it is one of the best transit systems that exists anywhere in the world. And take that away, and what happens then? That's crazy. And then combine that with Uber and Lyft, and
MTA buses are also transitioning to electric as well. So, if fleet becomes part of your transportation solution without owning a car, which is great. I didn't own a car to my second child. I got to almost age 40 without owning a car, but the second kid, my father-in-law had enough of driving us around. But yeah, I think we're trying to do everything possible. If you have to encounter the fleet world, and it's great mentioned the transition for the Ubers and Lyfts of the world as well, to at least have those be electric.
Great. Oh, we still have time for one more? Okay.
So my question is about charging stations. So a lot of charging stations today don't use or get a lot of their power for non-renewables. And how is there policy that's being put into place for the infrastructure to be renewable energy, because you can't really say the EV is giving zero emissions when it's actually getting charged by a point where it's getting it from natural gas or coal.
Well, certainly I can say in good news on the city government specific side, our agency, Department of Citywide Administrative Services, which runs 5 kind of big things for city government: real estate, the human capital, civil service system, energy, fleet, and procurement. Our energy division and working with all parts of city and state government, we have made a agreement in a project to source all electricity for government operations through Hydro-Quebec and through hydropower. So for all government operations, for the chargers and charging that'll power the city electric vehicles and city buildings and electrification of the buildings, that will come from clean hydropower, helping to address the very real issue of, the electric car. Obviously, it's wonderful at the tailpipe, but at the broader greenhouse gas level, you want to also have a sustainable energy source. So for city government, we are on our way to full hydropower as our energy source, and that'll help us achieve the benefits, certainly on the electric car fleet.
I was going to add that an electric vehicle is already at, even if it's 100% average energy coming for the vehicle coming from the average grid that exists right now, which is not 100% renewable, the EV is still five times more efficient in terms of its powertrain and operation. So you're already reducing emissions, even if you're charging on a mix of renewables and fossil fuel. But that is a very real issue. I highly also recommend you all go read, if you're interested, a report that came out from Rivian and Polestar. They did a life cycle analysis with a third-party company, so they weren't involved in it, but they funded it. And it looked at the overall projection of how quickly we can reduce emissions over the entire life cycle of an EV, because an EV rolling off the line, even if it's emissions from the tailpipe are zero, it's more emission heavy to produce an EV because the battery is more intensive. So if you're looking at a net zero future, it's going to be a spike up first for a good amount of time because the emissions of producing an EV is more, and then it will go down over the next few years once an EV is on the road and being used. So we have to look at it a holistic way. Where's the energy coming from? Where are the minerals coming from? And how we're manufacturing the vehicle itself using renewables and just clean materials, make it all holistic.
I think just exactly on this point, these vehicles last longer, kind of broadly speaking. And we're seeing, Teslas that have been out on the West Coast for 10 years. They have hundreds of thousands of miles on them in a way that it's a little bit different than a typical ICE vehicle. And so what you're raising is a really important point. But there are a variety of reasons, just to Martin's point, that to believe that this isn't just kind of a band-aid, but it's part of an all of the above solution that includes greening the deep sources of power, the ultimate sources of power, along with greening how we use things every day, along with making more long-lasting investments in things that we don't need to replace this often.
All right, we're going to end with that. Thank you all so much for coming. We'll give another round of applause to our panelists and our questions. If you haven't had a chance already, we have food and drinks over here. So mingling and munching can happen. And a little promo, I think we're trying to change the slide, but we will have an upcoming salon. It's going to be virtual, and you can check out our website for the topic. And our website will also have the recap and the recording of this session. Great, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, good job.
Good job.
Very nice.
Pleasure, yeah.
Thank you. Thanks very much for having me.
Of course.
Oh,
We should
doing it.
turn this on.
By the way,